Chapter 24. "I do not want to be here," Marianne whispered as the footman helped them from the carriage. Kath's gaze swept to the top of the black iron gate before them, all curled bars and jagged teeth finials. Jack-o'-lanterns were stacked along the top of the gate, their grotesquely carved faces staring down at the road, strings of their internal pulp stuck to the bars underneath. On the opposite side of the gate, acres of dark mud were spotted with vines and leaves and gourds. Most were goldish orange, but others were ghost white or yellow-green or speckled with crimson. There were pumpkins as small as Catherine's ear, and some the size of the carriage. There were smooth pumpkins and warted pumpkins, fat pumpkins and narrow, caved-in pumpkins that lay like beached whales in the mud. Fog had rolled in from the nearby forest, covering the ground in misty gray. Though Catherine was wearing her heaviest shawl, she felt chilled to the bone as she looked out onto the gloomy patch. "I'm beginning to have second thoughts myself," she confessed. "Let's leave," Marianne prodded, latching on to Catherine's doubt with renewed enthusiasm. "We'll get pumpkins at the market like everyone else. They'll probably be more cost-effective anyway. Or, better yet, let's not make a pumpkin dessert at all. Why not something with peaches? Everyone likes peaches." "Pumpkins are seasonal right now, and seasonal desserts are always best. And they do say that Sir Peter's sugar pie pumpkins are the sweetest in the kingdom." "Fine, but why not currants? Currants are seasonal. Or apples. You make a fine apple crumble." Catherine chewed on her lower lip. "I do make a fine apple crumble," she agreed, sighed, roughly shook her head. "We're being silly. We're here, and I've already chosen a recipe, and we might as well get this over with. He's a farmer, isn't he? He'll be glad for our business." "Are you sure? It's not very welcoming." Marianne eyed the picked jack-o'-lanterns. "In fact, he could really use a business advisor." "Too bad your expertise is already spoken for. Come on, we'll be in and out in the flutter of a hummingbird's wing." Kath inched closer to the gate. She could see a small cottage situated to the north side of the patch, with a curl of smoke coming out of the chimney and firelight flickering through the windows. They seemed to be home. The gate squeaked on its reluctant hinge as she pushed it open. "Oh, fine," Marianne muttered. "Wait one moment while I grab my bonnet." She rushed back to the carriage. Knotting her hands together, Catherine stepped onto the path that bordered the pumpkin patch. She inhaled the smell of fresh churned dirt and growing things, but beneath the freshness was also something akin to mold and rot. She grimaced. It was impossible to imagine anything pleasant coming from this land, but the rumors about the Peters' famed pumpkins were unmistakable. Great baking began with exceptional ingredients, and she needed to win this contest. "I feel like we're trespassing," Marianne said, shutting the gate behind them. Kath turned about to agree, but stopped short. Marianne's bonnet was one she'd never seen before. Simple but beautiful, made of crisp blue dyed muslin that matched Marianne's eyes. It was tied with a sunflower yellow ribbon. "You have a new bonnet?" "Yes, I bought it yesterday. At Hatta's marvelous millinery." Marianne looped the ribbons into a bow. Kath's eyes widened. "You didn't," she said, trying to imagine Marianne browsing through the shop where she drank tea and stood on the table and cowered from a monster attack. "What?" said Marianne, grinning cheekily. "I simply had to see it after you told me about the tea party. Besides, it's hardly your secret to keep. All the town's gossip has been about an extraordinary new hat shop. Now, there's a man who knows how to market his customers. What do you think?" "It's lovely," Kath answered. "You're lovely in it." Marianne shrugged modestly. "It's by no means the most elaborate piece that was on display, but the moment I saw it, I felt like it was just right. Wearing it makes me feel almost..." She hesitated a long moment. Too long. "What?" Kath prodded. Marianne looked away. "Whimsical," she murmured. It took Catherine a moment to realize her friend was blushing. Marianne never blushed. "Whimsical," Kath repeated. "It's silly, I know, but you're always dreaming of roses and lemon trees, and Marcus has such a grand imagination when it comes to the stories he tells. And even Jashir is passionate over tuna and cream. Whereas, to me, life is all numbers and logic, profit and loss, practical and safe. I thought it might be nice to let myself just dream, for once." She fidgeted with her yellow ribbon. "With this hat, it seems possible. Why?" Her eyes brightened. "This morning, I even had a fantasy that I'd single-handedly balanced the budget for the royal treasury, and all of Hot saw me as a hero." Kath shook her head, baffled. Had some villain knocked the budgie off balance? "Never mind that. It was the hero part that was important. All my life, I never dreamed I could be anything but a maid, just plain old me." "Oh, Marianne." Kath pulled her into an embrace. "I never knew you felt that way. I would share all my dreams with you if I could." "I know, Kath, and you do. You share the most important dream with me. Our dream." Kath smiled. "Yes, and this is the beginning of it. These pumpkins, these baking contests, and those 20 gold crowns. Of course, I'll need my brilliant business partner to tell me what to do with those crowns once we have them. I would be sure to make horrible decisions if left to my own devices." "You would," said Marianne without apology. "But have no fear. The bonnet doesn't seem to affect my head for basic mathematics." "Good. Then let's go find the best pumpkins in this patch, shall we?" They picked their way toward the cottage, their boots squishing into the ankle-deep mud. To their right, they passed a picket fence, or what had once been a picket fence, though now it looked more like a series of uneven, half-rotted wooden boards with crackled, peeling paint. It surrounded a smaller patch set off from the farm's main acreage, bearing signs of recent destruction and still smelling of smoke. Charred vines peeled on top of one another, blackened stumps that may have once been pumpkins, blistered paint where flame had touched the fence boards. This corner of the patch looked abandoned. The dirt path turned to loose gravel and weeds as they approached the cottage. Their footsteps crunched in the airy quiet. Kath plastered on a friendly smile and knocked on the door. They waited, their shoulders pressed together for warmth, but the only noise inside was the pop and crackle of a lonely fireplace. Catherine knocked again, harder, but was met with more silence. After a third knock, she began to wonder if Peter and his wife weren't home after all. She took a step back and searched the windows, but they were hung with a mesh of pumpkin vines. "I suppose they're not home," said Marianne, sagging with relief. Catherine scanned the patch. The pumpkins were like bubbles disappearing into the fog. She had half a mind to grab a few and run. "Did you hear that?" said Marianne. Catherine cocked her head and listened. A faint noise. sawing, she thought, the back and forth grate of teeth ripping through wood. "Let's go see." She ducked away from the cottage door. "Must we?" Marianne whined. But she followed Kath anyhow, through a tangle of vines that had overgrown their row and crossed over the mud-squelching path. Rounding to the back of the cottage, Kath spotted a pair of lanterns flickering off the limbs of the encroaching forest, silhouetting the shells of two enormous pumpkins. They were the biggest pumpkins she'd ever seen. Their severed stems were the width of tree trunks, and their orange flesh reached the same height as the cottage's roof. The pumpkin furthest from them had even been carved to look like a building of sorts, with tiny square windows cut from its flesh and an iron pipe sticking out through the ceiling that could have been a chimney. Peter was standing on a rickety ladder against the second pumpkin, pushing his saw back and forth through its shell. He was dressed in filthy overalls and sweating, every muscle straining as he pushed the saw in and out and in. Watery orange liquid oozed from the cut and dripped down the pumpkin's side. Afraid to startle him, Catherine and Marianne waited until he'd finished the cut. Hanging the saw from a hook on the ladder, he pushed at the pumpkin's shell, forcing a tall, thin piece of flesh into the gourd. It left a window barely wider than Catherine's hand. Inside, she could see the stringy guts and seeds dangling from the pumpkin's ceiling. The smell of fresh-cut squash rolled over them. Covering her mouth, Catherine coughed. Peter turned so fast and nearly slipped off the ladder, but caught himself on a vine that hung down the pumpkin's side. "What are you doing here?" he barked.
"Good day, Sir Peter," said Catherine, curtsying. "We are too sorry to bother you, but I was hoping I might be able to purchase some of your famed sugar pie pumpkins. I'm entering the baking contest at tomorrow's Turtle Days festival, and I have my heart set on making a spiced pumpkin cake."
Peter glared at them, and Kath had the horrible vision of him sawing them both into pieces. She shuddered. Marianne glanced sideways at her, and Catherine bited her smile to hide the horrifying thoughts in her head. Grabbing the saw, Peter scrambled so fast to the ground, Catherine was surprised he didn't send the ladder flopping into the mud. His eyes darted between them with a discomforting intensity, a barely restrained madness. Catherine and Marianne both drew startled steps backward. "I didn't ask you here. You're not welcome, and I'm not about to do business with intilted, condescending trollops like you. But think you're better than me, no matter I've been knighted by the king himself, right as anyone. You want a sugar pie pumpkin? You can grow it yourself. Get your own pretty hands all dirtied up for once." Heart hammering, Catherine stumbled back another step, pulling Marianne with her. Her eyes kept darting to the saw and its rusted teeth. I beg of you," Marianne stammered, looking almost bricky with her newfound heroism. "Not to speak of my lady in such a—" Catherine tightened her grip on Marianne's elbow, silencing her. Marianne seemed relieved to be silenced.
"I am sorry to have intruded on your privacy, sir. But if I've shown less than a tablespoon of respect for you, it's because of the shameful attitude with which you conduct yourself."
Though her legs felt weak, Catherine held her ground, refusing to be cowed by ill manners.
"I was under the impression that this pumpkin patch was open for business, and if you'll behave with decency, I do wish to be a patron of yours."
Peter bared his teeth at her, which did cow her somewhat.
I don't wish to take up too much of your time, but I am willing to pay your price if you'll just show me where the sugar pie pumpkins are. We could harvest our own."
She was cut off by a loud thump. She jumped and glanced past Peter, to the pumpkin already carved with slitted windows. The thump was followed by scratching, nails carving into rotting wood. The sound reminded her of Cheshire sharpening his claws on her mother's finest upholstery. Beside her, Marianne squeaked.
What was that?
Kath asked. What's what? Peter said, though Kath was certain he must have heard it too. His question was followed by a breathy snort from the pumpkin shell, like a horse struggling against its bit.
Is there something?
Catherine took a step forward the pumpkin, but Peter put himself in her path. He was as big and unmovable as a boulder. Were my uneducated words not clear enough for all your fancy learning? He said. I do believe I told you to get off my land.
But...
Catherine, Marianne tugged at her elbow.
He doesn't want our business. Let's just go.
Kath ground her teeth, meeting Peter's glare with one of her own, part of her wanting to shake off Marianne and slap this man for his crude behavior. The other part of her grateful for Marianne's intrusion and a reason to leave. She glanced once more at the large pumpkin, which had fallen silent. She allowed the tiniest of respect nods.
I'm sorry to have bothered you. Please give Lady Peter my regards.
I'll give her no such thing, he growled, but Catherine pretended not to hear him as she and Marianne began picking their way back along the gravel path, pebbles and beetles scattering in their wake. It was not until they had turned the cottage corner again that Marianne let out a strained breath. She took to tying knots into her new bonnet's yellow ribbons.
That's the last time I'll let you drag me here, she said.
The very last time.
That won't be a problem. What a horrible, horrible man. And that strange noise, what could it have been?
An animal of some sort, I'd guess, said Marianne, shaking her head.
With those windows cut into it, the pumpkin reminded me of a cage. But why would anyone keep a pet inside a giant pumpkin?
They passed by the scorched picket fence, and Kath's eye caught on a spot of orange amid the wreckage. She came to a halt. Marianne turned back. What?
I think I saw...
She hesitated.
Wait here.
The fence was short enough that she could climb over it when she lifted her skirts.
Kath?
Marianne glanced back toward the cottage. What are you doing?
One moment.
She picked her way through the squishing mud and scattered ashes, the coils of burnt vines. A pile of brush was in the corner, vines and leaves hacked to pieces. They all but crumbled in her hand as she pushed them to the side, uncovering the small orange pumpkin that had caught her eye. A sugar pie pumpkin with bright, unblemished skin and not a wart in sight. It was a beautiful, dazzling survivor amid the destruction. Beaming, she dug the kitchen knife from her boot. She'd come prepared to harvest her own in case Peter proved less than helpful, and hacked away the sturdy green vine that tethered the pumpkin to its smashed kindred. Cradling the dirt-smudged pumpkin against her dress, Catherine picked her way back through the ashes and hauled herself over the fence.
Are you mad?
Marianne asked.
He'll kill us if he notices it's missing. He won't notice. This patch was obviously meant to be destroyed. And look!
She held the pumpkin up in the dim light breaking through the fog.
It's perfect.
Oh, something hard and sharp jabbed her through the thin sole of her boot.
What was that?
Marianne leaned over, bracing herself on her knees, and picked something out of the mud with a slurp. Whatever Kath had stepped on, it was small enough to fit into Marianne's palm. She held it aloft.
A pony?
Kath inched closer, trying to keep the weight off her throbbing foot. Her eyes widened. The tiny pony was run through with a metal peg, hints of gold paint visible beneath the filth.
"A carousel pony,"
she murmured, unable to meet Marianne's eye, for she recognized it, sure as salt. It was from the lion's carousel hat, the one he'd been wearing the night of the Hatter's tea party, the one he'd been wearing when the Jabberwock had carried him into the night.